The doors of Buckingham Palace did not slam that morning. No voices echoed through the corridors. Instead, an unsettling silence spread from room to room, the kind of silence that only follows news capable of changing history. Within minutes of a confidential medical briefing, the royal household was forced into emergency discussions that no family ever hopes to face. King Charles's health had taken a deeply concerning turn, leaving Prince William and Princess Catherine with a responsibility they never wanted to carry so soon. This was no ordinary palace announcement, no routine update prepared by advisors or delivered through a spokesperson. The king had made one deeply personal request. If the nation was going to hear the truth, it should come directly from the future king and queen. That single decision transformed a private family crisis into a defining moment for the monarchy itself. Across the palace, emotions remained hidden behind composed faces, yet every hallway carried the same unspoken question: what happens next? Before we uncover how this heartbreaking chain of events unfolded and why it changed the royal family forever, make sure you subscribe this channel so you never miss our latest royal updates. Because what happened behind those palace walls would test not only the future of the crown, but also the strength of the family standing behind it. Prince William did not react immediately after reading the confidential medical report. He remained completely still, staring at the final page as though every sentence carried a weight too heavy to accept. Across the room, Princess Catherine watched him in silence, recognizing the change in his expression before he spoke a single word. She understood that this was no longer just about the king's health. It was about the future of the monarchy and the responsibilities that could soon shift onto William's shoulders. King Charles had deliberately asked that neither palace officials nor medical advisors deliver the news publicly. Instead, he trusted William and Catherine to stand before the nation together, believing that honesty spoken by family would carry more comfort than carefully crafted royal statements. Around them, senior palace staff quietly suspended meetings, delayed engagements, and reviewed official schedules without attracting attention. Every action reflected the seriousness of the moment. William slowly lowered the report onto the table, knowing that once the announcement was made, nothing inside Buckingham Palace would ever feel the same again. A son was preparing to speak for his father, while an heir quietly realized that history had begun moving faster than anyone expected. As final preparations for the announcement continued, an unusual stillness settled across the palace. No hurried conversations echoed through the corridors, and no official attempted to soften the reality facing the royal household. The silence itself became the loudest warning. Catherine remained beside William, offering quiet strength rather than comforting words, understanding that sometimes presence means more than reassurance. Palace advisors reviewed the king's upcoming engagements one by one, quietly discussing which duties might need to be postponed or transferred if his condition continued to worsen. Every revised schedule carried the same painful message without saying it aloud. Charles was no longer able to shoulder every responsibility alone. William understood exactly what those changes meant. Each responsibility moved from his father to him felt less like an honor and more like another reminder that time was changing everything. Catherine could see the conflict behind his calm expression. The world would soon view him as the future king stepping forward, but inside the palace, he remained a worried son, desperately hoping the moment everyone feared could somehow still be delayed. Behind closed doors, emotions unfolded very differently for every member of the royal family. King Charles accepted the medical reality with quiet dignity, determined to protect both his family and the institution he had spent a lifetime serving. William struggled to separate duty from grief, knowing millions would soon study every word he spoke. Catherine focused entirely on keeping him steady, realizing her greatest responsibility was no longer ceremonial but deeply personal. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla received the heartbreaking update separately. She sat alone after the meeting ended, surrounded by complete silence, understanding that titles offered little comfort against uncertainty. The palace itself seemed transformed overnight. Familiar routines disappeared as official diaries were quietly revised and confidential conversations replaced ordinary business. Every member of staff sensed that the monarchy had entered a chapter unlike any before. No dramatic announcement had yet reached the public, yet inside Buckingham Palace, everyone understood that the greatest challenge was no longer preparing a statement. It was preparing a family to face a future that had suddenly become frighteningly uncertain, while somehow convincing an entire nation that the crown remained strong. Long before the public announcement, the first warning came during what was supposed to be an ordinary family dinner at Windsor Castle. There were no cameras, no reporters, and no expectation that the evening would become one of the most unforgettable moments in recent royal history. King Charles appeared calm as he spoke about future engagements and upcoming responsibilities, determined to reassure everyone that life inside the palace remained under control. Then, without warning, he reached for his glass and paused. His voice faded halfway through a sentence, and for a brief moment the room fell completely silent. Prince William noticed it instantly. Across the table, Catherine watched the king's hand tighten against the edge of the chair as though he was forcing himself to remain composed. No one interrupted, yet everyone understood something had changed. Charles attempted to continue speaking, but the second pause carried even greater concern than the first. William quietly stood from his chair, his expression changing from concern to quiet determination. Catherine realized that this was no longer simple exhaustion. It was the first unmistakable sign that the king's health had become a far more serious matter than anyone had admitted. The dinner ended earlier than planned, but no official explanation was offered. Charles returned to his private rooms, while trusted medical specialists were quietly called inside the palace. What followed was not a routine examination, but an urgent assessment that would determine how much of the king's workload he could safely continue carrying. Outside the room, William stood alone in the corridor, unable to look away from the closed door behind which his father was being examined. Catherine soon joined him, saying nothing because she knew words would not ease what he was already feeling. Both of them understood they had crossed a point from which there would be no easy return. Inside the palace, senior advisors immediately began reviewing future engagements and preparing alternative schedules should Charles require extended rest. Every confidential discussion pointed toward the same possibility without speaking it aloud. The monarchy had quietly entered a period of transition. William felt the responsibility drawing closer with every passing minute. Yet all he truly wanted was for his father to walk back through that door smiling, and prove that everyone's fears had been unnecessary. Days later, after the medical findings had been confirmed, another private meeting brought together King Charles, Prince William, Princess Catherine, and Queen Camilla. The atmosphere inside the room was far heavier than any official ceremony could ever be. Before anyone else spoke, Camilla questioned why William and Catherine had been chosen to deliver such deeply personal news instead of allowing the palace to control the announcement. Her concern came from fear, but her words filled the room with growing tension. William remained calm before finally explaining that hiding the truth would only damage the public's trust in the monarchy. If honesty caused pain today, deception would create far greater pain tomorrow. Catherine could see emotions beginning to overpower reason. She stepped forward gently, reminding everyone that Charles was still sitting beside them, listening to every word. This was not a debate about headlines or public opinion. It was about a husband, a father, and a king facing the most difficult chapter of his life. Her quiet reminder immediately changed the mood, bringing the conversation back to the person at the center of the crisis. After listening in silence, King Charles finally spoke. His voice was softer than usual, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. He revealed that the decision had been entirely his own. He had personally asked William and Catherine to stand before the nation because he believed they represented both continuity and compassion during a time of uncertainty. He wanted the public to see reassurance rather than confusion, honesty instead of carefully hidden fear. William lowered his eyes, not because he felt victorious, but because the responsibility placed upon him suddenly felt even heavier. Catherine remained beside him, realizing that Charles was not simply preparing an announcement. He was quietly preparing the future. Camilla listened without interrupting, gradually understanding that the king's choice had never been about replacing anyone. It was about protecting the institution he had dedicated his entire life to serving. As the meeting ended, everyone left carrying the same realization. The crisis had moved beyond illness. From that moment forward, every decision inside Buckingham Palace would shape not only the king's remaining public role, but also the future direction of the monarchy itself. The following morning, Buckingham Palace no longer felt like the familiar home it had been only days before. Every hallway carried quiet urgency as aides revised schedules, removed engagement cards, and exchanged confidential folders without unnecessary conversation. Each small adjustment revealed a larger truth that no official statement had yet confirmed. Charles remained the king, but the demands of the crown could no longer rest entirely on his shoulders. William received an early call from senior palace officials informing him that several royal duties would now require his immediate attention. He listened carefully, answering with short, measured responses, though inside he felt the growing weight of every responsibility being placed before him. Catherine stood nearby, watching him absorb one decision after another. She understood the painful contradiction he was facing. The world would interpret these new responsibilities as the natural rise of the future king, but William knew better. Every engagement transferred to his diary represented another responsibility his father could no longer comfortably perform. This was not a promotion he had hoped for. It was a reminder that duty often arrives through heartbreak rather than celebration, demanding strength before a family has time to process its grief. Later that day, William was invited into Charles's private sitting room without advisors, aides, or senior officials present. For the first time since the crisis began, titles seemed to disappear behind the simple reality of a father and son sitting together. Charles looked at William with remarkable calm, though the physical strain on his face could no longer be hidden. After a long silence, the king quietly apologized not for becoming ill, but because the burden of the future had arrived far sooner than either of them had imagined. William struggled to answer. He admitted that accepting greater responsibility did not frighten him nearly as much as the possibility of losing his father while carrying it. Those words dissolved years of royal formality between them. Charles reached across and gently held his son's hand, reminding him that leadership had never been measured only by strength, but by compassion, honesty, and the courage to remain steady when others looked to him for hope. At that moment, William understood that his greatest challenge would not be wearing the crown one day. It would be protecting the man who still wore it today. When William stepped outside the room, Catherine immediately recognized that something inside him had changed. She did not ask what Charles had said because his expression already revealed the answer. The conversation had not removed the pain, but it had given him clarity. Meanwhile, news of the king's condition continued spreading beyond palace walls. Television networks interrupted regular programming, newspapers prepared special editions, and crowds slowly gathered outside Buckingham Palace, carrying flowers, handwritten messages, and quiet prayers. Across the country, people were no longer discussing only the king's health. They were watching William and Catherine closely, searching for reassurance during an uncertain moment. Commentators repeatedly highlighted Catherine's calm presence beside her husband, describing her quiet support as one of the strongest images of the entire announcement. William noticed those broadcasts, but quickly turned away from the screen. He never wanted public admiration earned through his father's suffering. Catherine understood exactly what troubled him. She reminded him that the nation was not celebrating change. It was finding comfort in seeing a family face heartbreak with honesty, dignity, and unity. As evening settled over Buckingham Palace, the reality facing the royal family became impossible to ignore. Charles accepted that some responsibilities would need to pass temporarily into William's hands, not because he had surrendered to illness, but because protecting the crown also meant protecting the people who depended upon it. William accepted those responsibilities with humility, determined to honor his father's trust rather than replace him. Catherine remained the steady presence holding the family together whenever emotion threatened to overwhelm duty. Even Camilla, despite her own heartbreak, gradually realized that Charles's decisions had never been about choosing sides. They had been about safeguarding the monarchy's future with honesty instead of fear. In the end, this chapter was never simply the story of a king's illness. It became the story of a family, learning that true leadership is revealed during moments of uncertainty, when compassion becomes stronger than ceremony, and truth becomes more powerful than tradition. As Buckingham Palace prepared for the difficult days ahead, one thing had become clear to everyone watching around the world. The crown had entered a new chapter, carried not only by history, but by the love, sacrifice, and resilience of the family entrusted to protect it.